Can I have a show of hands of how many people here are new to the Cube of Truth? Wow. Looks like half of you. Well, that's really good to see. And how many people here would consider themselves regulars? How many people here would consider themselves regulars at the Cubes? Okay, awesome. I'm really proud to be here. It's been a long time coming. Melbourne's not far from Sydney, so it's kind of weird that I haven't come out here sooner. But somebody asked me the other day which chapter's thriving the most, and I had to say Sydney because of the activity. It's undeniable. How many cubes operating now?
Weekly, 3 to 4.
Just incredible. And the way Michael put it earlier was really funny. He said there's satellites operating around Sydney. So you've got Parramatta and Bondi, etc. And these cubes that are happening outside of Sydney are doing phenomenally well. And I'm just blown away by the results that keep coming in from the Sydney cubes and the things that have been pulled off with the world's biggest cube and International Cube Day and all of these things that happened in the past were just mind-blowing, and the tally, and yeah, I mean, I'm very proud of the Sydney chapter, and I think you should all feel the same way, so it's really good to be here. So, have you guys ever seen a Cube of Truth workshop? Online or no? Yeah? Yeah? Okay, cool. So I'm just going to first break down what the Cube is all about, and then I'll break down the outreach. And for the outreach element, we're going to have Matt doing his portion for 20 minutes. He's going to talk about some things that he can bring to the table. And then we're also going to have Joshua Entis, who's just flown here from the other side of the world. 39 hours on a flight. Round of applause. I remember when Josh contacted us wanting to set up in Seattle, and it's been a journey ever since then. It's been a real privilege to see you grow as an activist, so I'm honored to be able to have him here as well to do his portion for the outreach. So he'll be up here for 10 or 20 minutes, and he'll bring his package to that element as well. So I'll talk about the cube. There are many nuances that go into the cube and the structure, and it is very important that everyone understands little nuances because it's all the 1% that make it 100%. And if we don't pay attention to those small details, then the entire package won't live out its full potential. When we started in Melbourne initially, we were experimenting and trialing different things, but over time what we did is scrutinize what we were doing to death. And we've gotten to a point now where we feel that we have pretty much mastered the whole concept of doing video outreach. And it's not to say that we don't have room for improvement, that's always the case, but what I'm trying to get at is that there are many angles that go into it and many nuances, so I'm just going to break it down. So what we do is we stand in a cube structure. You have even numbers on each side of the cube. So you wouldn't have 4 on one side, 3 on one side, 4 on one side, 3 on one side. It would be even all the way around. That's very important. Everybody in the cube is standing nice and straight, really nice posture, almost like an army soldier, very robotic and very present in the moment, not looking around, not hands in pockets, not checking phones, not looking around, talking to people, taking the mask off, talking to bystanders. You're very much in the moment and engaged. And it's important that if you're holding a TV, in Sydney it's TVs. What about the other chapters? Are they using TVs?
Yeah, every chapter.
Every chapter in New South Wales? Yeah? It's incredible. We do have some things that are a little bit different for those chapters who have laptops and tablets instead of TVs. And I guess I won't cover that because we're in Sydney right now. So I'll just talk about the TVs. So when you're holding the TVs, you just want to make sure that you're holding it as if you want to treat the way that you're holding the TV as you would treat a painting on your wall at home. You'd want it to sit nice and straight. You wouldn't want it to be crooked. You wouldn't want it to be pointing upwards like that or the other way, pointing down. You'd want it to be nice and flat and straight. okay? If you're holding a sign, same deal. You either hold it like this, or you could hold it from the bottom of the sign like this with your arms by your body. As long as it's nice and straight, that's what's important. And outreachers can come over to you and tell you that you need to, because we have the outsider perspective, we might straighten things up for you. So that's another way that we work together to make sure that the cube is nice and aesthetic. The distance between each other is also important. So cubers should have pretty much shoulder to shoulder distance, or as close together as possible. So that obviously you don't want the TVs to overlap. You'd want them to sit flush. And the same with the signs. So the spacing between cubers is also important. Also, the way that we operate in terms of communication. So if you are in the cube but you want to come out of the cube, the way that we do that is we raise a hand. So that's the universal way of communicating when it comes to these events. Around the world, you just raise your hand, and then an outreacher will approach you and find out what's up. So we would do that in 3 circumstances. The first circumstance would be if you need to come out of the cube for whatever reason. So if you just can't hack it anymore and you need to leave and swap with somebody else, you'd raise your hand. We'll come over and we'll find somebody to swap with you. And that might take a few minutes, but we'll find somebody to swap with you in that time. The second circumstance where you would raise your hand would be if a child, a child is watching unattended to by a parent. And that's an action plan we have in place to make sure that we don't get ourselves into too much mischief with parents and people complaining about showing violent images to children. I personally think that children should be shown the truth, but for the sake of longevity of these campaigns, it's important that we do have an action plan in place to make sure that we're doing the right thing. So in that case, we'll come and find the parent to make sure that they have permission to watch what's on the TVs. So that's how we deal with that. If children are watching unattended to, raise your hand, and outreacher will swarm over, find a parent, make sure they have permission. If they don't, we'll ask the child, no, we won't ask the child to leave. We'll maybe walk them away from the TV and just educate them through conversation. And obviously that would be a child-friendly form of outreach. You wouldn't do it the same way that you would do it to an adult. The third circumstance you would raise your hand is if you can see someone who's out there in the public who hasn't been spoken to for a significant amount of time. So usually we have about 30 seconds to a minute, if I had to put a time frame on it, before we approach people. So we let them come to us, and it's very important that we adhere to this because we want to filter out those people who aren't interested and aren't open-minded. It's very important that we allow them to come to us, that we're not forcing people to have this conversation with us. Because you have to remember that veganism benefits people very much, and it's, obviously it's an altruistic thing that we're doing when we're vegan, but people get so many benefits out of it. But they won't truly see the value in veganism unless they make that decision on their own to come to us and to learn about this subject. So it's very important that we allow them to come to us and to watch for 30 seconds to a minute if I have to put a time frame on it. But you can use your best discretion. If someone's waiting for minutes and minutes and no outreacher has approached them, I'm pretty sure this doesn't happen in Sydney. I know everybody's super busy and active, but I will cover all of this to make sure that everyone gets it. But if a bystander hasn't been spoken to for minutes, raise your hand, and an outreacher will come over. Let them know in a covert manner that there's a bystander over there that needs to be approached. So don't just point your finger, because obviously that's going to put them on the back foot, and they're going to know you're talking about them, and they're not going to like it. So yeah, that's what you do. Alert them to, but everyone's doing their job here, so this doesn't really apply to Sydney. So they're the 3 circumstances you would raise your hand. Now, as you know, with the Cube of Truth, you don't need to show up with a mask or anything really. You just need to show up in black clothing. And if you don't have black clothing, the darkest clothing you possibly have in your wardrobe. The masks are provided at the events, and all the equipment are provided at the events, so you don't need to worry about any of that stuff. The footage that we show in the Cube is all local, and it's all recent, and we're constantly growing our footage database. We're now at a good point where we have our database is growing quite rapidly, and we're going to have a lot more footage coming. So especially for Australia, given that Dominion is coming out soon. So that's pretty much the cube. Does anybody have any questions about the cube? That's, again, it's up to your discretion and your best judgment. Because I could say 6 years old, but what does that mean really? Some people mature faster than others. So let's just leave it at toddler. Yeah. I'm assuming you're talking about children watching the footage? Yeah. Sorry, I didn't make that clear either. Yeah. So a toddler, someone who's underage, someone who shouldn't really be watching without a parent. Just use your best judgment. But if they're,
So if the kid's young enough to have a parent present to just go shopping, then obviously that would be a child. But if they're out on scooters scooting around,
yeah, if they're out on scooters scooting around, let them watch. That sounds like a good candidate. So that's pretty much the cube. Did you have anything? Do you think have I missed anything? No, that's the cube, right? So that's the cube. But oh, right. So the outreach material. Well, that's
VR headsets.
yeah. Well, the VR is look. The VR is more of an accessory to these events. I'm actually. It's funny that you brought up the VR because we recently were discussing it and what we're going to do with the VR because we actually don't have the iAnimal dairy footage but we need to. The thing is with the VRs in Melbourne, for example, and we've done many events in Melbourne, it doesn't really get used, so we don't even use it anymore. I mean, 1 or 2 people might use it throughout the entire event. And so it's very much an accessory to the event. But I will cover it. It sits on the table, so it's important that you have a table at these events to have a VR there. And then somebody should be manning that table and handling any bystanders that come to the table with interest in using it. And then you might want to give them a quick briefing on what they're about to watch. And then once they finish watching, that's when you would do your regular outreach approach. The good thing about the VR is that when people do use it, it really does immerse you into that environment of a slaughterhouse. It really does take you there, So usually, I mean, if people are being intellectually honest and present, after they take those goggles off, they're pretty overwhelmed. And it's pretty easy to do some solid outreach on that person at that point. So they are good. And that's the VR. So you'd have it on the table and someone has to be there manning it at all times. Outreach material? Brochures you mentioned?
We do have these, which Kyle will give a run through. But we also, I mean, if you could just, how you close with the cards.
Yeah, that's outreach though. So I'll get into that when we do outreach. So now we'll move on to the outreach part. So there's 2 elements to these events. There's the cube and then there's the outreach, okay? The outreach is where we do the educating, the real educating. I mean, people can educate themselves just by watching the screens and not talking to an outreacher at all. And many, many people have gone vegan just by watching what's on the screens and not talking to an outreacher and processing it on their own and have contacted us later to say that they went vegan. So that in some way can educate people, but the real education comes from the outreach discussions that we're having. So our job is to find these people that are stopping with interest, that are absorbing what's on the screens, and then we swarm in and have a conversation. How do we do that? Well, I've been rolling out really basic approaches for everybody throughout since the inception of AV, just to make it simple, because I want everybody to take something that they can use as a foundation and then start to build on it with their own personality types. The best icebreaker is hello. It's the best icebreaker in the world. I think it's overlooked. Just say hello, because that way you're just being a normal human being. And then you can say, have you ever seen this footage before? That's a great question to start the conversation. Have you ever seen this footage before? Do you know why we're here? Would you like to know why we're here? These kinds of questions, just to get the conversation started. And also to gauge where they're at in terms of this issue. Have they ever even considered veganism? Have they ever seen slaughterhouse footage? Have they even thought about the fact that animals are killed for food and the food that they eat? And through that question asking in the beginning, you know who you're dealing with. If you get the answer, yeah, I've seen this footage before, and they've got this apathetic attitude towards it, you've got a lot of work to do. But if they say, no, I've never seen it before, you know that they're probably more malleable, and you're going to find your job is easier to penetrate through their conditioning. So that's the way that you would break the ice. And then you would ask, how many people here have heard about the Socratic method? All of you.
Should have all heard. It's on the bits of paper you're holding.
Yeah. So the Socratic method was introduced to the vegan movement by a friend of mine named Earthling Ed. And since he brought it to the movement, it's been amazing. I mean, a lot of us were asking questions, but when he brought that to the table as a package, it really made it easy for everyone to understand, and also to understand the importance of it. And since then, we've been implementing that into the outreach approach with AV. First of all, I'm just going to say that the entire process of starting a conversation with somebody and getting them to a vegan conclusion and getting them to the point where they feel that they need to actually be vegan. There's no other way. That entire process is a sales process. And I recognized that when I first started doing street outreach in 2016. When I started doing it, I recognized that it was all sales. Sales is life. I have a very strong sales background, but I was always doing it for money. And that's a very different motivation. Right now, I call it a value-based sales approach because we're doing this to change the world. And that's a very different motivation. So it's important that you see it as a sales process, because I could talk to you about the entire process and break it down in sales terminology. It would make complete sense to all of you. When people say bacon though, or plants though, or ancestors though, these are known as, in the sales world, these are known as objections. And we as outreachers need to handle objections. And that's what you see when, I'm assuming that a lot of you here have a very good knowledge base of this argumentation and you know how to respond to these arguments, right? So when you do handle those arguments, that's exactly what you're doing. You're objection handling. You're handling objections. I just realized there's a dog there. That's awesome. Yeah, so we're handling objections, and then let me just go back to what I was saying about breaking the ice. You would start by asking questions to gauge where they're at in terms of this issue, and then you know what work you have to do. You might need to do more discovery questions to find out more, and then you can do discovery questions throughout the entire process just to find out more about them and more about their sensitivities. Are they more sensitive towards the fact that there's cruelty going on towards animals? Or are they more sensitive towards the health implications of eating animal products? Or are they more sensitive towards the environment because they just had kids and they want their kids to have a planet to live in? So ask a lot of questions. Discovery questions are talked about throughout the sales world profoundly and all the time. And discovery questions are basically your currency in having a conversation with somebody. And what you also want to do is build rapport. So be a normal, cool human being. There's no need to be a robot with people and just, go through the motions of asking certain questions just in order to get to a certain point. Enjoy the process. Have fun with it, but keep the tone of the conversation serious, because it is a serious issue that we're talking about. But at the same time, be a human being about it. Be cool about it. Have fun in having the conversation. Enjoy it. Because they'll pick up on that energy and they'll want to stay there and have a conversation with you more so if they feel that from you. One thing I'll also talk about is when it comes to this issue, what I found works best is focusing on why people should be vegan, and then how. How should be at the end. The solution is to be vegan, and we can show you how. Challenge 22, recipes, Happy Cow. These are all tools that can help you to be vegan. And here's, the how is at the end of the conversation. We should be focusing on why from start to the end. And the end is where we tell them how. So you need to focus on why. Why is it important to be vegan? Because you can be healthy and happy without harming animals. And why wouldn't you if that's the case? And you really need to touch on these questions that really make people ponder on that why factor. And that's how you get people closer to taking this issue seriously. So why and then how. And then what we do is we tally our results, by the way, and I'll get into that at the end. But another thing that we should all be aware of is while we're having the conversation, if people are giving objections, it's not necessarily people being negative. Some people are definitely being negative, and there's no point in even talking to some people who aren't open. And it's very important to not only find people that are open and have conversations with them and find those opportunities, but also know when to cut your losses. Being good at both of those things is really important, because you don't want to waste your time and energy on people who just want to sap it from you. And there are a lot of people out there, but there are a lot of people out there who also are open-minded and want to have this conversation. So our job is to focus on those individuals. And if people are just wanting to have a shit fight with us, just cut your losses and move on. So the people who are open-minded, like you can probably, you have to use your best judgment on this, but people who are giving argumentation and objections aren't necessarily even believing in what they're saying. They're just rattling off what they've heard. The internet told me to hate vegans, right? Bacon though, plants though, ancestors though. That sounded logical when I heard it once. So I'm just going to relay it back to you. These people don't really, and you know what they're doing? I feel like a lot of times people are just saying this stuff so that they can be debunked. Subconsciously, I feel like they're just putting it out there just to see how that logic will hold in a conversation with a vegan activist who knows their stuff. So it's important to recognize that negative comments or seemingly negative comments and objections are actually points of inquiry. They're really looking to find answers. And if you can see between the lines, it makes it easier for you and it helps you to stay sane during these conversations. So what we like to do is ask questions with the Socratic method instead of telling people and lecturing people. When I first started doing outreach, I was just lecturing people. The first event that we did in Melbourne, I was just lecturing people. If you were willing to stand there, I was going to lecture you. And I remember at one point I realized that someone said, well, there was a group of people and one guy started laughing and I said, what's so funny? I was like really serious when I started. It's like, what's so funny? And I stopped talking and he said, we joked before you walked up to us that we were going to get caught in a conversation like for a long time. And I said, well, if you guys are going to stand here, I'm going to keep talking. So my whole attitude was, I'm just going to lecture everybody. And obviously I've learned that that's not the best way to do it. What I've learned is that people like to come to their own conclusions. They like to think that they made their mind up on their own, right? The best you can do, and I think, Matt, you gave me this line once, you can't sell anybody anything necessarily. How did you word it?
But you can help them buy it.
You can help them buy it, okay? There's a difference. You can't sell anybody anything, but you can help them to make that decision. And people like to think that they made that decision on their own. And it's important to let people have that ability and that space to do that, to not take that away from them. I'm sure everyone here can relate to that because I'm sure everyone here made their own minds up to become vegan. Am I correct? Yeah, so that's why we should also allow others to make their own minds up. Also, it's very important that we understand that we're not necessarily trying to make people go vegan there and there on the spot. That's not what this is all about. we don't necessarily need to get them to commit to being vegan there and there and also become an activist there and there. Have you guys heard about the 100-point system? Joey Carbstrong's been talking about it recently. It was, oh God, I've forgotten his name, a vegan activist in Israel who is a part of Friendly Vegans, I believe the name is the organization. So basically, it's a system that we use to understand where people are at in terms of their journey. If you've never heard about veganism before, you're at 0 points. Okay, and some people move slower than others up on the scale. So your job is just to add points to the scale, as many points as you can to that scale. So if you have a solid conversation with somebody, that might be 30 points. Then later on that week or that month, they see a documentary, they see a post on Facebook, they see a comment, somebody says something that makes them think. That will continually add points to their scale. Eventually, they'll get to 100 points and they'll be vegan. But your approach should be based on adding as many points as you can to that system, not necessarily getting them to 100 points. This is very important because it'll keep you sane. Right? I know it's really tough when you've done your best, you've made so much sense, and they don't go vegan on the spot. Like, why? It made so much sense. I broke down everything for you. I destroyed all your arguments. You're still not vegan. So maintain your sanity by using this way of thinking, this 100-point scale. It's very helpful. Closing. So I'll get into closing now. So that's another term that's used in sales. If you don't close at the end, it's almost as if your hard work has gone to waste, because at the end you haven't closed it off and given them something which plays on the how. How do I be vegan? You have to give them that in order for them to follow up. So the way that we do that is we offer them a card, and the card has information succinctly on it that will allow them to do follow-up and to look into this information so that they can make an informed choice on what they would like to do. On our website, it has everything on there. It's got all the documentaries that we as vegans talk about, all the speeches, and it's got Challenge 22 on there for people who want to sign up to that. Does everybody here know what Challenge 22 is? Does anybody not know? Raise your hand if you don't know. Okay, so I'll quickly tell you. It's an online support system. You have to have a Facebook account, and there's a team in Israel. Well, it's a global team now, and they will support people for 22 days from transitioning from where they are now to becoming vegan. And it's a really fantastic tool. It's free of charge, and people can just do it online at their own pace. Whatever challenges people have, they sign in. They have an experienced vegan who mentors them one-on-one. They even have clinical dietitians on board, and they can ask these questions directly to these people and have a response given to them. So whether it's about recipes, whether it's about nutrition, or any concern that they're having whatsoever, they can get that through that support system. It's a lifesaver. Without that, I don't even know what we would do as vegan activists when it comes to giving people the resources they need. Every time a vegan activist puts up a YouTube video, and at the end we put the Challenge 22 up, but if we didn't put Challenge 22 at the end, we'd have to take on all those messages and support everybody individually, and there's just no possible way that we could do that. Could you imagine Joey and James and Ed and all these people sitting at the computer mentoring people all day long? They would never get any videos done. They'd never get any work done. So Challenge 22 is a lifesaver for the movement. Use it. I recommend it. It's on our website. Everything is on our website for fostering the transition to becoming vegan and staying vegan, and more importantly, becoming active. So I also want to touch on this. We're not just promoting veganism at our events, we're promoting vegan activism. We're kind of subconsciously or subtly doing it anyway, because people show up at our events and they get the message that vegan activism is the way to go because look at what we're doing. And they're a part of it. They can see the cube, they can see the outreach conversations happening. They can see that veganism isn't just about eating cupcakes. It's about getting out onto the streets and having conversations with people in a cool, aesthetic, artistic way. So the activism is subtly promoted to people in that way, but it's important that we also talk about speaking up. People don't necessarily have to join us at the cubes, but they do have to speak up. So it's important that at the end of the conversation, when you talk about how to be vegan and you give them the support and the resources, so back to closing, you would ask a question like, so how do you feel about what we've talked about today? Just something like that. How does that sound to you? Just something like that, to see how they feel about the conversation that you've had with them. Offer them a card, tell them what's on the website, tell them about the resources, tell them about just a snapshot of the documentaries that are on there. Some people might say, oh, it's a bit too graphic, I don't know if I'll follow it. Well, watch Cowspiracy and What the Health. They're not graphic. It's very educational. You can make more of an informed choice. And based on their response, you'll know whether they're taking this issue seriously or not. But then also plug vegan activism in there. I like to say, so after we've had this discussion, do you think that this is an issue that should be eradicated from the world? And if they say yes, I also say, and do you think that you should be speaking up about this? And if they say yes, I then talk about the different forms of activism that you can get involved in. You can do it on YouTube. There's many different ways that you can do vegan activism. There's a long list of ways that you can do activism in your own way. So it is very important that we promote veganism and vegan activism. And the card, once you give it to them, you explain the card and then you gauge whether they're taking the issue seriously. And that's how we collect our tallies. So that's pretty much it with the outreach. Again, it's just about having good conversations with people, not necessarily convincing people to be vegan on the spot. That's very important. And we find that with these demos, people respond really well. And we're able to have conversations with people that we're not otherwise able to have. And I think we as vegans can all agree that we just want to have conversations with people that go well. You know, at the end of it, people get it. Because it is very simple when you are intellectually honest about this. It is so simple, and it's blaringly obvious that we should be vegan once you understand it. My take on veganism is that we are all born vegan. We're all already vegan. But we just don't think of ourselves as vegan because of what we're conditioned to believe what veganism is. We're conditioned to believe veganism is tree hugging. It's, you know, the way they paint vegans is so morbidly different to what it really is. It's so off the mark completely. But when you understand veganism, it just makes pure sense and it fits into your soul beautifully. It's who you are. Of course, we don't want to cause unnecessary violence to any being. I mean, a pig, that dog right there, I never really loved animals growing up, I'll be honest with all of you. But to imagine harming an animal like that dog right there would haunt me for years. I wouldn't be able to sleep after it. I would be a mess. You know? So it doesn't, for me also, I don't think veganism comes down to loving animals. I don't think veganism is about love or compassion. I don't think it has anything to do with that. I think it has to do with justice. It's just the right thing to do. It's that simple. If you wouldn't walk down the street and kick animals randomly in the face, then you're already vegan. You already have these values instilled inside you. If you don't go out of your way to cause unnecessary harm to animals, then you're already vegan. You're already vegan. And most people do that already. Most people in their day-to-day lives already operate like this, and they just don't realize they're already vegan. But because of their conditioning, they go and buy a steak because they're used to eating at steakhouses. That's how they grew up. That's how everybody eats around them, and that's just part of it. And they don't even think of that steak as an animal, which is part of the conditioning as well. So that's the outreach element. Does anybody have any questions with regards to outreach? Yes? Yeah, the pharmacist video. Thanks for bringing that up. That's probably a classic example that some of you might know about. That video has now got 1.3 million views collectively. And in that interaction, he was challenging me and us on the basis of, he was just challenging everything. And he basically was saying that he was against what was happening on the screens, but he was directly supporting it, which was... So what I recommend is, and I know that this isn't going to sound, this is the hardest thing to do, is to stay cool in those situations. And I know that that's easier said than done, but that's quite literally what we have to do. Because the one thing that will keep you calm is knowing that the truth is on your side. There's nothing that anybody can say that will take that away from us. Nothing. No matter how good they think their arguments are, no matter how intellectual they think they sound, nothing. So just remember that in those moments. Try to remember the truth is on your side. There is no way you can argue against harming animals. I mean, there's no way you can argue against avoiding the harm towards animals. There's just no way. So staying calm, asking questions instead of lecturing. In those moments, it's extremely important to do that, to continue to ask questions. In the pharmacist video, I was asking questions, but I was also making points, because at some points you can gauge whether it's effective or not to just relay points to the person because of the state that they're in. They're in this argumentative state, and he wanted to make points. And so I was rebutting with my own points. But I was doing it in a very calm way. I mean, I wasn't exactly completely zen about it, right? But I wasn't aggressive about it either. So it's, maybe just find a middle ground where you're able to stay centered and not let your emotions get to you and have you say things that you don't really mean, and maybe forget your own argumentation. Because when you're riled up, you can be thrown off and forget what you're supposed to say and not address argumentation properly. So that would be my advice on that. Yes?
Have you ever had anybody say to you that you're attacking them even though you're not? So I had somebody come up to me and I was doing the questioning.
Yep.
They were answering it, and then they came to the conclusion that actually I was right. But then they went, "No, you're attacking me. I don't like the way you're talking to me." And the first one, I was like, "Oh, okay. Am I?" I sort of doubted myself, but people around me were like, "No, you were just questioning." And I think he got upset with the fact that he had come to the conclusion of what he was doing was wrong, but then immediately just tried to push back on me. So I don't know. I just said, "I'm sorry you feel that I'm attacking you."
Don't say that.
Yeah.
I hate that.
I know.
I'm sorry you feel that way. It's so disingenuous.
Now I'm reflecting. I'm like, what would have been a better way to finish that? He took a broach with it.
Yeah, I would also say don't apologize. Be unapologetic about because we don't have to apologize for being against animal abuse. Why do we have to apologize? And we're just trying to spread the word. We're sticking up for these innocent beings because they can't stick up for themselves. So I would just ask the question, do you really think that I'm attacking you?
You're right. I should have just asked another question. He put me off though.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a first. Oh, God.
Do you really think that me standing here and asking you questions is a form of attacking you? Do you really think that that's me attacking you? Just because he's obviously projecting in that moment. He feels attacked by his own conscience. How dare you make so much sense? Now I actually have to take this seriously, which means I can't eat my steak anymore. That's what he's thinking, right? And his conscience is slowly, obviously he's now projecting it onto you and saying, you're attacking me. But he feels attacked by his own conscience. That's really what's happening. Yeah. Does that help?
It does. How do you get over the fact that you walk away or they walk away and you say, I could have done that better, and you kick yourself and you're like, I feel like I missed an opportunity?
This is why I love doing these cubes. I just keep, every time, this never gets old for me because you're constantly learning. I just recently realized that I say okay too much and too much I'm like, why? I need to work on that. It's better to leave it open and have silence in between your words so you can think about what the next angle you're wanting to take is, and also give that person a genuine moment to absorb what you've said. It's hard, but this is the work that I have to do. And yeah, you do think, maybe I could have said this, maybe I could have said that. That's part of it. Everybody in all forms of art or creative fields all have this, by the way. They're always thinking, I should have said that, I should have done that. On this song, I should have really gone on this and did this bridge and had this person featuring on it. It's forever like that when you're creating and you're mastering your craft. So that's normal. You had a question? Yep. So you asked 3 questions there. There was...
Yeah, so like, for example, all the time with my friends, the main thing that I get is it's natural costing.
This might be some more Josh covers and some more I cover.
Yeah?
Humans, a lot of people think it's human nature costing.
All right, so I'll cover the human nature part, and then these guys can add their own 2 cents. Nature should never stipulate morality. So I would say, but do you think that it's natural to eat animals when you do not need to? Because in nature, animals eat animals out of survival. And some animals might kill other animals out of frivolity. I've seen monkeys do it. But we're not monkeys. We're humans. And humans are supposed to be civilized beings. So I would say something to the effect of, do you really think that it's respectful, and do you really think that it's peaceful to stab animals in the throat when we don't need to, whether it's natural or unnatural? I would try to move away from the natural thing, because nothing's natural in this world. Maybe ask that question, do you think we live in a natural world? We're standing here in Pitt Street Mall. What's natural about this setting? What was the second question? The second? And well, then you went on to humane slaughter, which is probably the biggest thing that people love to use. Do you think that if you care about humane slaughter, that would suggest that you care about the treatment of animals? Do you think that you bringing up humane slaughter means that you recognize that animals have moral value? And if so, is there really a humane way to slaughter an animal who wants to live? Just as much as you and I want to live. So that's how I'd get around it. Humane slaughter is really easy to debunk, because the golden rule for morality is to do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. And so if you wouldn't have it done to yourself, it's never humane. And that's it. So you might want to ask that, what I just said in the form of a question, you might want to ask that to them. Cool? Anybody else? Yep.
Sometimes I find it harder to outreach to people who say that, oh, I don't even eat dairy that much, I'm lactose intolerant, no, I don't really eat eggs, or no, I don't even eat red meat, and like, it's like, well, you're basically like vegans, like how do you say, like I just end up saying, okay, great, well, keep going, like how do you like tell them the story?
All right, I'm going to be straight up with you. That's a lie. Whenever I hear that, I know that they're lying. You know why they're saying that? Because you're making so much sense, and they don't want to sound like a bad person in front of you. That's it. They're just trying to make it sound like, oh, I'm not really even that much of a non-vegan. I'm barely a non-vegan. So it's the angle to take wouldn't be, well, you're basically there. What's the problem? It's more so to the point of my approach to that would be just going back into the why we should be vegan. And people say, when people talk like that, usually they say, well, I don't even really eat that much red meat. And then you'll say, well, do you eat fish? Oh, yeah, I eat fish. Oh, yeah, I eat chicken. even though all of those meats are red. Like, there's no such thing as, it's just bleached. Like, but, you know, those people are also good, because if they do feel guilty, that's a really good sign. You've got them in a good place. If they feel like they need to belittle their non-veganness in front of you, that's a sign that they feel guilty. And so it's a good opportunity for you to say, well, the good news is, you know, there is a solution to this. And going into the reasons why you should be vegan, and, you know, I would say maybe treat it as a regular conversation, and don't even pay credence to the fact that they're saying that they barely eat meat, because that's a lie. I think it's a lie. Unless, you know, some people, I mean, I guess use your best discretion here on whether they're being genuine. But most of the time I find that they're just saying that. Anybody else?
How you came with this amazing idea with the cube?
Well, just getting out onto the streets and doing what we were initially inspired by Earthlings Experience, which was a form of video outreach that was brought to the vegan movement by a couple in I can't even talk. There was sisters. The Frampton Sisters is their name, and they're over in the UK. And they started doing it with neutral-looking masks. They're masks from a horror movie, I believe. When we wanted to do it, we were working off that inspiration. So the first event and the second event were very much like just taking from what we had learned from them and trying to replicate it in Melbourne. Because no one had done that in Melbourne at that point, but everybody wanted to do it. So I launched the event from my Facebook page and just got out there. And that's what I recommend, is just getting out there and getting the ball rolling. And then you learn as you go. So the first thing we did was we chose the anonymous masks strictly. Because number one, those other masks, in my opinion, are creepy, and they don't symbolize anything. So I felt there should be some symbolism attached to what we're doing. And the anonymous masks have a powerful symbolism to them. They stand to fight against oppression, in all different forms of oppression, systems of oppression throughout government and throughout schooling and etc. The anonymous movement have been known for breaking down and exposing. And so what we wanted to do is bring light to the biggest injustice, the biggest form of oppression ever, and that's animal exploitation. So we just wanted to bring that to, we're not the first to bring it to the anonymous movement. There is a group in Israel called Anonymous for Animal Rights. They're actually the group who created Challenge 22. They don't wear the anonymous masks though, from my understanding. They don't do street outreach from my understanding. I could be wrong about that. But yeah, we just wanted to do video outreach with the anonymous masks. Then when we first started, we did a line. And from our first demo, we wanted to add structure. So we were looking for ways to make a line look good. So what we did is, in Burke Street Mall, we had one person facing that way, and then the person next to them was facing the other way. The person next to them was facing the opposite way. So you know what I mean? And we had laptops and tablets going, and we had about 15 people that showed up to the first event that we threw in Melbourne. So that was a morale booster. I was very excited, and I even recorded a video and put it on my YouTube. And I recently watched it back, and I sounded like a little kid in the video. I was so motivated and inspired, and I wanted to keep doing this street outreach so badly. And so we launched one 2 weeks after that. We just wanted to get back out there like immediately. And then we got out, and then we did a circle, because we saw a group in Germany do it, I think it was, or it was in the UK. We thought circle's cool, because it would cover all angles. No matter where you walk from, you'll see it. But what we quickly learned is that the circles aren't ideal, because it's very hard to keep everybody straight, and the circle to look aesthetic, to keep it aesthetic, is a nightmare. And also the numbers, and there's many factors that we couldn't gel with, so we ended up just scrapping the circle. We went back to lines, and then we did a diamond, and then This is what I mean by experimentation. We were just trying different things. Yeah, we did a diamond, and then we did a cube with one side chopped off and put it up against the wall. Because we thought, well, that side's not going to get viewed anyway. That was the logic, but it looked crap. So we ended up with the cube. That was actually a Sal's idea. So she's the other half who was supposed to be here, the other half of AV. She co-founded AV with me. She's in Melbourne having to deal with some legal issues and some personal issues, so that's why she couldn't be here. But that was her idea. Let's form in a square, in a cube. She said, let's do a square, and then we did it, and immediately we were like, see, there's something in nature, everything has curvature. Everything. So when you see something with sharp edges, like a cube, it stands out, it's very captivating, and I believe that's what's happening in the psyche of bystanders when they stop. So the sharpness of the edges and the formation itself of the cube is very captivating, and we could immediately notice that when we did it. Then we started adding structure to the cube itself. Where did the signs go? Where did the screens go? How do you hold the screens? And just quickly, I'll tell you what we do with people, with chapters who have laptops. One thing I had thought of is to add to the robotic nature and also to the aesthetic of this art performance was to extend your arms when people approach within 6 feet. So if they approach and they watch, you would extend your arms like this. Almost like an automatic door. When you walk in front of it, it opens. That's how I imagined it. You extend your arms like this, and then when they walk away, you extend your arms back. Very, very simple. And it was little things like that that made it what it is today. But the cube itself took us over time. We added and subtracted different things. Like we initially had signs that said, "Watch to see why we're here," which was something we took, I think, from Earthling's experience. Then we made it more succinct, and now we just have the word truth. Because the logic behind that was that if we ask people to come and watch, it comes off as desperate. And even though this issue is extremely urgent, we have to be in tune with psychology here. Otherwise, we won't get people in that state we want them in. So I would compare asking people to watch to someone in a retail store asking you to come into their store or to buy something. And immediately that puts you off, doesn't it? Even if you had interest in buying something as you walked into the store, that vibe puts me off. I know that for sure. If someone's like, "Hi," like immediately I know you're wanting to sell me something, and I just don't like it. I just don't like it. So we reduced it down to just the word truth, which could mean anything, right? But we want to also link veganism to truth and make that known in the public eye, that that's what this is. It's a truth that's not going anywhere. So that makes it more captivating and makes people more curious as to why we're there. The all black was a no-brainer. White mask, all black was very sophisticated. We felt there's a very sophisticated look. So we implemented that, and over time we just kept implementing different things. Then the outreach came about. There were people at the time doing street interviews like Joey and Ed and these people, and I wanted to get out and do street interviews myself. And I saw the opportunity to do these interviews while the footage was there as a much better way of doing things, because you can refer to the screens and people kind of get how serious this is because they can see it. You're not just talking about it. But you also have this art piece sitting there, which also sets the tone that they're a part of an event here, not just a conversation on the street with a random person. Does that make sense? Yeah, so I started implementing what is known as what I labeled as the value-based sales approach to the outreach. And then I really started to ramp up, the importance of outreach at these events and having the conversations, how the conversation should go, how we should approach people. Because initially we were handing out leaflets everywhere, like the first and second demo, leaflets. Hey, come check out, yeah, leaflets. And we had people like doing the whole marketing thing. Hey, come over here like this. Yeah. And we learned quickly that's not the way to do it. And so we now let people come to us, and we learned that that was very important in terms of psychology.
See it as a point of the marketing, actually.
Yeah.
Whatever you do marketing, selling, you're not, you are selling the truth.
Exactly.
Selling the truth always comes up.
We're selling the truth. Thank you. Yes. Any other questions? Yes. I don't know who to go to here. I'll go you at the back. I'm sorry, I can't hear most of what you said. Yep. If they're resistant in what way? Yeah. In a genuine way, offer them a card and say, look, if you're open-minded to this, I'll leave you with some information and you can look into it in your own time. But I'm not here to argue with you. That's not why we're here. We're here to just simply spread the message of non-violence towards animals. And you just offer them a card. That's genuine. Does that answer your question? Okay, cool. Kai?
Yeah, is there a particular objection you find which struggle with most, or could you feel a lot better?
A question?
A particular objection.
Oh, objection. The hardest one is I don't care. Isn't that the truth? If someone says that, how can you make someone care? If someone doesn't care, they're probably putting on a front. I hate to think that anyone doesn't. Most people I think care. They've just been conditioned out of it and they haven't had the right approach given to them. Well, it depends on how they're behaving. If they're being like I was just saying, like if they're being so resistant and even aggressive about it, then maybe you want to just cut your losses, yeah. But if they're being resistant to the message in the sense that they're saying that they don't care, and you feel like you're just trying to get blood out of a stone, then you might want to just drop a few seeds. You might want to just say a few lines that might impinge on his conscience or his or her conscience, and then just leave it at that. That's all I would really recommend in that situation. The important thing here is that we have people who are engaging with us and having a conversation with us. We're not just talking at them, we're talking with them. And if someone's standing there going, yeah, nah, all right, they're not having a conversation with you. So it is important that you also respect yourself enough and your time enough to say, okay, well, here's a card if you would like one. I'm going to get back to work. Because also they will pick up on that and then they will respect the message a bit more too. Anybody else?
I just have a quick question about vegans who are active.
Yep.
Finding that I'm trying to inspire others to be more active in what they're passionate about, but they think sitting in their bathroom and eating vegan food is enough. And I find, what's your take on that?
My take is that when you go vegan, so when you're not vegan, you're actively doing something, and what you're doing is unjust. When you go vegan, you go back to a place of neutrality and non-action. It means you're not doing anything now.
What about they use the excuse, oh, people around me, I'm an example for people around me. And I'm like,
That means, you know what I would say to that? Given the fact that you've said that to me, it tells me that you care about getting this word out. If you want others to be influenced by your lifestyle, that means you care about activism. You care about getting the word out. And then I would go into how effective it really is to only be an example. Is it really the best that we can do? Is it the moral obligation that we have is not to just eat vegan cupcakes. It's to speak up. Because if you're in their position, And I imagine that people, when they go vegan, they imagine what it would be like to be a cow or a chicken or a pig or a fish. And that's why they choose to be vegan, because they wouldn't want to go through what they go through. So you also just have to bring it back to the reason why they went vegan in the first place. And then, as the late, great Gary Oskey said, you speak for animals in the way that you would want to be spoken for. But when you go vegan, you just go into a space of neutrality. You're not doing anything now. And then when you become active, you're now back to doing something, but this time you're doing something in the right direction. When you're not vegan, you're doing something in the wrong direction. When you go vegan, you're doing nothing. And then when you become an activist, you're doing something in the right direction. Does that make sense? And so explaining this to people might be enough to get them to see that their actions are simply not enough.
They often use the excuse of, I've had a crazy activist try to attack me on the street and I don't want to be that crazy activist. And I say,
Cool.
come and see what I'm doing and see that it's not like that way.
Yeah, you could say that, or you could say, how about you paint the example of what a vegan activist should be? How about you get out there and show us what a vegan activist should do? Be the example. Like they said that they wanted to be the example. So be the example. Anybody else? Yes? Can I just ask you to speak up? Because yep.
You mentioned that veganism is essentially about justice and morality, not compassion and love. And I kind of agree with that. But does it make sense when it introduce elements of health and environment to kind of make the argument to somebody who's ready to buy that argument that it's about justice and morality?
But you see, those are benefits for being vegan. They are. You getting more health from being vegan is a benefit of being altruistic, doing something for others, and you shouldn't expect anything in return when you do that. But in this case, you do get more years added to your life and better quality of life. You do reduce your footprint environmentally. You do a better thing for humanity. And those are good things. Well, the humanity part would also be altruistic and maybe even the environmental, but they're also kind of selfish. The environmental is like, well, I want a world to live in for me and my kids and my kids' kids. It's kind of like selfish thinking, isn't it? Right? But because most people who become environmentalists, no, I won't say that. A lot of people who become environmentalists are doing it for their own reasons, because they want a world to live in. Okay? But when you say, I don't want to kill animals, you're not doing that for yourself. Unless somebody gets off on being sanctimonious and just wants to be right and loves the fact that you're so right when you're vegan, so they go, like I know some people like that, but it's what I'm trying to say. Look, let me paint it to you like this. You don't need to love humans to not kill them. I've got humans I despise, but I wouldn't kill them. Does that make sense? Yeah, so same should apply for animals. If you don't need to kill animals and you choose not to, you don't do that out of love necessarily. You do that because it's the right thing to do. Does that make sense? And I think it's also dangerous to attach it to compassion. This is my opinion here. I'm not saying that this is how everyone should think and how everyone should do outreach. I'm just saying, in my view, I think it's dangerous to attach being vegan to being compassionate, because it implies that you have to have this compassion and love to not kill, which kind of borders on insanity, because it should just be the normal thing in this world to live your life and not cause unnecessary harm to others. Just in the same way that you would do it, the same way that you would operate towards your fellow human beings. So if I walk down the street and I don't gouge a cat in the eyeball with a stick, that doesn't make me compassionate, does it? If I walk up to somebody and I say, I'm not going to stab you, does that mean that I get points? Do I get points for that? That doesn't make me a compassionate being. So I hope my view makes sense now. Anybody else? Oh, sorry, did you have more that you wanted to expand on?
No, I think what I was trying to say is that what you're saying makes perfect sense, and I agree with that. But this introducing elements of health and environment mellows down the original argument that this is based on justice and morality.
Animals come first in our advocacy. I stress that because it's about the animals. 3 trillion plus animals are brutalized and murdered every year So the environmental stuff and the health stuff, in my opinion, are not as significant as that. And so when we talk about the benefits of being vegan, adding years to your life, the vitality that you're going to gain from doing this, and the environmental impact that you're going to reduce your footprint, etc. These are bonuses for being vegan. And it makes the total package a lot more impressive and tempting to look into. But at the end of the day, when you're vegan, the word vegan literally refers to animals. It doesn't even refer to the environment. It doesn't even refer to health. If you look up the definition, it's a lifestyle that seeks to exclude or avoid causing unnecessary harm to animals or contributing to the exploitation of animals in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't talk about environmental health whatsoever. Does that make sense? Cool. Anybody else? Yes? They can't prioritize it because they've got a mental disability. They can't prioritize it. So I would ask more questions about that. What do you mean by not being able to prioritize it? But I mean, are they feeding themselves? I'm very I can appreciate this, and I'm very understanding about this, but I would want to ask more questions about this and find out if they're feeding themselves or they have somebody feeding them. Because if they're feeding themselves, it's really all about just going to a different aisle and getting a different milk. It's not that big of a difference in the choices they're making at the supermarket or the restaurants that they're eating at. Once, prioritizing it, it's not really... Again, it depends on who's feeding them. I would say it really comes down to that. If they're feeding themselves, it might be easier for you to describe this in a way, because they probably think that it takes a lot of work to be vegan. That's what I'm picking up on here. They think it's a lot of work to simply choose to eat a veggie burger instead of a chicken burger. When, as you know, that's a very easy choice to make and it doesn't take a lot of work at all. If they're feeding themselves, it would be easier to get that message across. If someone's feeding them, that might be a bit more difficult. You might need to just work on the why factor a lot more and have them feel the conviction of why they should be vegan, and because then they will have to promote it to the person who's feeding them at that point, and you won't be there for that. They'll have to be the vegan activist in that situation. So you might want to just instill these why factors in them so much that they will go off and understand that they want to be vegan and they won't allow anyone else to feed them unless it's vegan. Difficult, I know, but my answer officially to your question is it sounds like there's a series of questions that need to be given. There's more discovery questions that are needed.